Mikan by Ryunosuke Akutagawa. It was a cloudy winter evening. I sat slumped in the corner of a second-class carriage on the train departing from Yokosuka, absent-mindedly waiting for the departure whistle. Unusually, I was the only passenger. Looking outside, the platform was also deserted. Even the usual figures, seeing off travelers, were nowhere to be seen. Only a single puppy, locked in a cage, barked now and then with a voice that sounded pitiful against the dim light. It was as if the desolate scene perfectly mirrored my own spirit. My mind was weighed down by an indescribable fatigue and listlessness, as though a heavy grey cloud had settled inside me. I kept my hands stuffed deep into the pockets of my overcoat, too weary even to pull out the evening newspaper and glance through it. After a while, the whistle sounded. With a faint sense of relief, I leaned my head back against the window frame and waited for the stations to begin sliding away. But before the train could start moving, I heard the clatter of wooden clogs rushing toward the platform gate, and the next moment, with the conductor shouting angrily behind her, a girl of about 13 or 14 burst into the carriage. The door slammed open, and as she tumbled inside, the train shuddered once and began to move slowly. The platform's columns, a forgotten water cart, and a red-capped porter giving thanks for a tip. All these slipped away behind the window, blurred by the smoke curling in the air. I finally allowed myself a breath, lit a cigarette, and raised my heavy eyelids for the first time to glance at the girl now sitting across from me. She was a typical country girl, her hair oily and tied awkwardly back in a ginkgo leaf knot, framed a pair of chapped, inflamed cheeks so red they were almost painful to look at. Around her neck hung a worn, dingy green woolen scarf. In her frost-bitten hands, resting atop a large cloth-wrapped bundle on her lap, she clutched a third-class ticket tightly, as if it were a precious treasure. I disliked her immediately. Her rough features, her dirty, shabby clothes, her ignorance. Not even knowing the difference between second and third class, all irritated me. Wanting to forget her presence, I pulled the newspaper from my pocket and unfolded it across my knees. At that time, the light from outside faded, replaced by the harsh glow of the carriage lamps. And the crude print on the newsprint, smeared and uneven, suddenly stood out vividly before my eyes. The train had entered the first of many tunnels along the Yokosuka line. I skimmed the newspaper, but its contents offered no comfort. Peace negotiations, weddings, corruption scandals, obituaries. As the train roared through the darkness, I flipped mechanically from article to article, my mind numb, feeling as if the world itself were moving backward. All the while, the cold little girl sitting in front of me loomed in my consciousness like a living symbol of the ugly, tedious, incomprehensible reality surrounding me. The dirty tunnel, the dreary news, the grimy countryside. Everything seemed dull, pointless, hateful. Disgusted, I tossed the newspaper aside, leaning against the window, closed my eyes, and drifted toward a half-sleep. Some time must have passed. Suddenly, I was startled awake by a rustling noise. Opening my eyes, I saw the girl had moved to sit right beside me and was struggling to raise the window. Her small frost-bitten hands strained against the heavy glass, but it wouldn't budge easily. Her cheeks flushed even redder, and every so often she sniffled quietly, her breath coming in quick little gasps. Despite myself, I felt a twinge of pity. But then I realized the train was about to plunge into another tunnel. Through the dusk outside, the dry grass on the hillsides loomed closer and closer. It made no sense. Why would she insist on opening the window just as we were about to enter the smoky darkness? I could only think it was a child whim, nothing more. Still irritated, I sat there watching coldly as she struggled, almost hoping her efforts would fail. Just then, with a loud whoosh, the train dived into the tunnel. At that same moment, the window finally dropped open with a bang, and instantly, thick sooty air poured into the carriage, stinging my face and throat. I, who already had a weak chest, couldn't even raise my handkerchief to shield myself. I was overwhelmed by coughing fits. Yet the girl, seemingly oblivious to me, leaned halfway out the window, letting the dark wind whip her hair loose, staring intently ahead into the darkness. If not for the sudden gust of clean air and the faint sense of earth, dry glass, and water seeping through as we emerged from the tunnel, I might have grabbed her and forced the window shut, coughing all the while. By now, the train had slid out into open country. It passed through a shabby town at the edge of the hills, broken down thatched roofs, and narrow alleys crammed between fences. A single faded flag fluttered lazily by the railroad crossing, likely waved by the gatekeeper. The whole scene was bleak and colorless under the cloudy sky. Just then, I saw them. On the other side of the crossing gate, 3 little boys, their faces ruddy from the cold, were standing close together, peering up at the train. They were all tiny, dressed in faded, patched clothes the same color as the drab town around them. The moment the train passed, they raised their hands high and, craning their necks, let out shrill, wordless cries. And in that instant, the girl, half out the window, stretched out her frostbitten hands and, with a sudden bright motion, flung something into the air. A burst of color scattered across the boys. Vivid orange mikan. Tangerines. Tumbling down like little suns against the grey dusk. I caught my breath. And in that fleeting moment, I understood everything. The girl, most likely on her way to enter service in some distant place, had carried those mikan hidden in her bosom. She had opened the window, braving the smoke and cold, to toss them to her little brothers who had come all the way to the crossing to see her off. The dreary town, the 3 tiny boys calling out like little birds, the burst of brilliant fruit against the dull sky. All of it flashed past the window in an instant. But in my heart, it left a vivid imprint, sharp and burning. For the first time that day, I felt something well up inside me, a strange, bright warmth I couldn't name. I sat up straight and looked at the girl, really looked at her, as if seeing a different person. She had already turned to her seat, her chapped cheeks buried in her tattered scarf, clutching the heavy bundle on her lap. Her third-class ticket still gripped tightly in her hand. At that moment, I felt, for just a little while, the heavy fatigue, the dreary boredom, the grim, meaningless reality, all those things that had weighed me down, lift away.